Dr. Rebecca Morrison was sorting old photographs inside the Atlanta Historical Archive when a single image stopped her breath. It was dated 1903, a wedding portrait showing a white man in a dark suit and a young black woman in a white gown. Their hands were clasped, their bodies posed like newlyweds. But something felt wrong. In 1903, Georgia, interracial marriage wasn't only forbidden, it was a crime. So why did this picture exist? Rebecca marked it for scanning, but the uneasiness followed her home. 2 weeks later, when she examined the high-resolution file, she zoomed in on their hands and froze. The bride's fingers weren't resting. They were sending a message. Her thumb and index finger formed a hidden distress signal, carefully shaped inside the wedding pose. The woman's eyes, once blurry in the low-quality print, now showed fear. This wasn't a wedding. It was a silent cry for help. Shaken, Rebecca called Dr. Marcus Williams, an expert in African American history. When he saw the photograph, he whispered, "This shouldn't exist, unless it wasn't a marriage at all." He pointed at the woman's expression, terrified, controlled, trapped. Then Rebecca turned the photograph over. A faded note read, "Mr. Charles Whitfield and servant." Not wife, not bride, servant. Rebecca felt a chill. Someone had staged a fake wedding photo to hide something darker: control, ownership, captivity. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. The bride's fingers haunted her. The message was clear, desperate, intentional. A plea frozen for 120 years, waiting for someone to finally see it. The next morning, Rebecca and Marcus decided to start an investigation. Their only clue was a name Charles Whitfield, a man who should never have appeared in a wedding photo like this. And somewhere inside that photograph, a young woman had left a message across time. "Find me." Rebecca and Marcus arrived at the Georgia State Archives early the next morning. When they mentioned the name Charles Whitfield, the elderly archivist, Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, stiffened as if she had heard a ghost. "That name still carries weight," she murmured, "and not the kind anyone should be proud of." She disappeared into the back room and returned with several dusty boxes. Inside were census sheets, property records, and newspaper clippings. The deeper they looked, the worse it became. According to the 1900 census, Whitfield was 28, wealthy, unmarried, and living in a large house on Peachtree Street. Listed beneath his name were servants, all black women and girls, ages 14 to 30. One entry caught Rebecca's eye instantly. Louisa, age 16, domestic servant. Marcus grew quiet as he read the documents. Whitfield owned a textile factory, employing mostly black women and children in brutal conditions. Newspapers praised him as a progressive gentleman and pillar of Atlanta society. But the records told another story. Families complaining their daughters stopped writing. Parents being turned away at Whitfield's door. Police reports dismissed without investigation. Mrs. Hayes leaned closer. "If you think something happened to that woman in the photo, you're not wrong. Whitfield's name appears in more missing person files than I can count." Rebecca felt her heart drop. The bride wasn't just any young woman. She was most likely Louisa, the teenage servant who mysteriously disappeared in 1903. The distress signal suddenly became even more urgent, more heartbreaking. Louisa hadn't just been afraid, she'd been trying to survive. Marcus folded his arms. This wasn't a marriage photo. This was documentation, proof of possession. He wanted her to look like his bride, because in his mind, she already was. Rebecca looked down at the photograph again, the fear in the girl's eyes, the message in her fingers, and whispered, We're coming for your story, Louisa. We hear you. To find Louisa, Rebecca and Marcus dug deeper into 1903 city records. Mrs. Hayes suggested looking through missing persons reports, even though police rarely took black families seriously at the time. After hours of searching, Marcus finally found something: a small, almost ignored police report from September 1903. It said, "Report filed by Henry and Martha Johnson regarding their daughter, Louisa Johnson, age 19, employed at the Whitfield household. Family claims she has not been seen for over a month. Mr. Whitfield states she is well and fulfilling her duties. Case closed." Just like that. No investigation, no follow-up, no justice. Rebecca cross-checked the 1900 census. Louisa had been 16 then, living with her parents and 3 younger siblings. Her father was a carpenter, her mother a laundress. A humble, working black family, trying to survive in a society built against them. Marcus found more in 1902. Louisa's father had been injured in an accident and could no longer work. The family went into debt and asked the local church for help. That was when Whitfield stepped in. "Perfect timing for a predator," Marcus muttered. Then they discovered something heartbreaking. A letter from Louisa's mother, Martha, written to her pastor in July 1903. "We have not seen our Louisa in weeks. She has stopped writing. Mr. Whitfield will not let us visit. The other servants look frightened. Reverend, my heart tells me something is wrong." The pastor's journal revealed his response. He had confronted Whitfield, who dismissed the Johnson family as ungrateful. The pastor believed him. Rebecca felt physically sick. The system wasn't broken, it was built exactly to protect men like Whitfield. Everything pointed to one truth. Louisa didn't disappear. She was taken, silenced behind Whitfield's wealth and power. But the photograph whispered the truth he tried to hide. Louisa had fought back the only way she could. Rebecca and Marcus followed their next clue, the stamp on the photograph. Morrison Wright Portrait Studio, Atlanta, August 1903. Rebecca contacted the descendants of the photographer, and surprisingly, they still kept his old studio journals. James Morrison, the great-grandson of the photographer, invited them to his home. He led them to a small study, lined with boxes and leather-bound journals. "My great-grandfather documented everything," he said quietly. But some entries he struggled with. He opened a journal marked August 1903 and flipped to a page with a faded ribbon. "This is the one." James read aloud. August 17th, 1903. "Today I was asked to photograph a wedding. But there was no wedding. The young Negro woman brought here did not come of her own will. The dress didn't fit. Her hands trembled. Her eyes full of fear." Rebecca felt her throat tighten. James continued reading. Whitfield gripped her hand and forced her to pose. I noticed bruises on her wrists. The girl looked at me, as if begging me to see her. Just before I took the photograph, her fingers shifted. A message, I believe. A signal of distress. I captured it. The room went silent. The photographer had seen it, the same signal Rebecca saw, 120 years later. He even wrote that he felt physically sick afterward, knowing he had captured evidence of something horrific, but powerless to intervene. Reporting a wealthy white man in 1903? Impossible. Dangerous. Rebecca whispered. She tried to tell someone, and he saw her. Marcus nodded. And now, so do we. The journal confirmed what the photograph suggested. The image wasn't a celebration. It was a crime scene, staged in plain sight, documented by a photographer who understood the truth but had no power to stop it. Now, Rebecca and Marcus did. With the photographer's journal confirming Louisa's fear, Rebecca and Marcus pushed deeper into Whitfield's history. They searched court files, charity records, and community archives, anything that mentioned his name. What they uncovered was not a single tragedy, but a pattern. Between 1899 and 1905, at least 6 black families had filed complaints about daughters who went to work for Whitfield and then vanished. The pattern was always the same. A struggling family, a young girl hired as a servant, letters home for a few weeks, then silence. Attempts to visit blocked at the door. Police reports dismissed instantly. In one case, a young woman named Sarah had survived and later given a secret testimony to a black community group. Her words were chilling. "We were never allowed to leave. He said if we tried, he'd have our fathers lynched. He did whatever he wanted." Another girl, about 16, was kept locked upstairs. Then one night, she was gone. He said she stole something and ran, but she would never leave. She was too scared for her family. Rebecca closed her eyes. The description matched Louisa perfectly. Whitfield had support from powerful men, judges, police, city leaders, because he donated money and maintained a facade of politeness. Behind that polished image lived a predator protected by society. Marcus slammed a file shut. He hid everything in plain sight. The picture wasn't just his fantasy, it was his victory. Proof that she belonged to him. Rebecca looked again at Louisa's trembling fingers in the wedding photograph. "No," she whispered. It's proof she fought. The pattern was clear. Louisa wasn't the first, but maybe she was the one who refused to disappear quietly. And Rebecca was determined she would not let her disappear again. Despite the horror they uncovered, Rebecca kept returning to the photograph. Louisa's face, her trembling posture, and most of all, her hand signal. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't a nervous twitch. It was a message she risked everything to send. A message meant for someone who could see what was happening when no one around her cared. Rebecca studied the photograph again under a magnifying lamp. The bruises on Louisa's wrist, the slight swelling near her temple, the way she leaned away from Whitfield even while sitting inches from him. Everything in her body screamed resistance. This picture, Rebecca whispered, was her only chance to speak. Marcus agreed. In a time where black women had no rights, no protection, no justice, she used the only language she could. While Rebecca focused on Louisa, Marcus dug deeper into community archives. There he found letters and notes from black churches and aid groups. Again and again, families described Whitfield as a man who lured young women with promises of employment, then isolated them inside his home. And yet Louisa did something none of the others managed. She left evidence. Evidence Whitfield could not erase. Evidence the authorities ignored in 1903, but could no longer be hidden in 2025. Rebecca felt a strange connection forming across time, across trauma. This girl from 1903 had found a way to reach her, a way to demand that someone, someday, tell the truth. This wasn't just a warning, Rebecca said softly. It was a promise. She believed someone would finally see her. And now Rebecca and Marcus had no choice. They had to follow Louisa's message wherever it led. The deeper Rebecca and Marcus searched, the more Louisa's trail seemed to vanish until Marcus found something completely unexpected. Not in Georgia, not in Atlanta, but in Washington, D.C. Hospital records from Freedman's Hospital, March 1904. A young black woman had been brought in by members of a mutual aid society. She gave only one name, Louisa. No surname, no details, only fear. The medical notes were heartbreaking. Multiple injuries, broken ribs, old bruises, fresh wounds. The doctors wrote she flinched whenever a man came near, especially white men. She refused to reveal where she had come from, saying only, "If I tell, he will kill my family." Rebecca and Marcus exchanged a look. This was her. Louisa had survived. A social worker named Catherine Wells had taken her case. In her notes, she wrote, "She speaks in fragments, captivity, threats, isolation. Someone wanted to pretend she was his wife. She says the photograph was the worst day." Then came the line that made Rebecca's breath catch. "I left a message in that picture. I moved my fingers on purpose. I needed someone to know I didn't choose this." Louisa had trusted that someone in the future would see her signal, and now Rebecca had honored that hope. Meanwhile, Atlanta newspapers from March 1904 told a different story. A fire had destroyed a room in Whitfield's mansion. A servant girl supposedly died in the flames, the body so burned it couldn't be identified. But a black newspaper whispered a different truth. The girl had escaped weeks earlier. The fire was no accident. It was a cover-up. Whitfield needed Louisa dead to protect his reputation. He needed the world to believe she had perished in his home, not escaped from his control. And somewhere far from Atlanta, Louisa began a new life under a new name. Alive, healing, hiding. Rebecca whispered, "You survived. You actually survived." But one more question remained, one that haunted both of them. What happened to Whitfield after Louisa escaped? That answer would come next. Now that they knew Louisa had lived, Rebecca and Marcus turned their attention to the last missing piece. What became of Charles Whitfield? They combed through newspapers, property records, and court documents from 1904 to 1906. The answers came slowly, but they came. After the suspicious fire in his home, the one he staged to declare Louisa dead, Whitfield's public image began to crack. Rumors spread quietly among Atlanta's black community. A few white neighbors whispered that something unnatural was happening inside his house. Donations he once made to judges and politicians stopped flowing. Men he had once entertained at his estate began to distance themselves from him. Then, in 1905, several of his factory workers were seriously injured due to unsafe conditions. A small black newspaper printed a daring headline: "Whitfield does not protect his workers." It was the first time his reputation took a public hit. Financial pressure mounted. Court cases piled up. He began selling properties fast. His mansion on Peachtree Street went first. Then, almost as if swallowed by the earth, he disappeared. Historical whispers suggested he left Georgia under cover of night, fleeing debts, shame, and the growing suspicion around the missing girls. No official investigation was ever opened. No charges filed. But his empire collapsed, and the Whitfield name faded from Atlanta's elite circles, like ash washed away in rain. Rebecca knew that for men like him, justice rarely came in courtrooms. Sometimes, justice comes in the form of truth, finally exposed. Their final discovery came from Catherine Wells' letters. Louisa, under a new identity in Washington, had eventually recovered enough to rebuild her life. She became a seamstress, then later trained as a nurse. She married quietly, raised 2 children, and dedicated herself to helping other vulnerable women find safety. She lived the rest of her life in peace, far from Atlanta, far from Whitfield, far from the room where her childhood was stolen. Rebecca held the photograph one last time, the signal in Louisa's fingers, the fear in her eyes, the strength it took to resist when no one was listening. Your message reached us, Rebecca whispered. You were seen. And now, 120 years later, the world would finally know the truth, not just of a photograph, but of a girl who refused to disappear, who survived the darkness, and whose silent cry crossed a century to finally be heard.